I think that what I'd like to do is to review the tool that I actually created for this conference. I think it was 2009, and for the pre-conference, and because it has been used in so many places across this country, and actually it's even more important than it has ever been. So we're kind of doing a replay of a tool that was created for this conference and is really kind of getting new life now with the reauthorization of ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act. So I don't know, Lenore talked to you about the idea that I've been around here for a while. Although when I look at the list of participants, there are not that many people that I think know me. So let me just give you a little bit of background before we get into this. I worked in Pennsylvania schools for 27 years before I went to Washington. I was the director of special ed, dropout prevention, alternative schools at Shikellamy School District in Sunbury, Pennsylvania. And I worked in transition almost my entire career. So it was a natural that we were heavily involved with what was then PAVSNAP. And I was the president. I just looked at that list and found out that it was 1988 to 89. So that's kind of a surprise as well. But I was fortunate enough, and actually through a meeting quite like this, when individuals from George Washington University used to present our weekend workshops. And I started to do some work with GW around the Perkins Act, and was asked to come down and do some testifying. And in meeting those people at GW that were heavily involved in this work, I went into the doc program at GW. And when I finished the doc program, I was asked to come to lead a new national project that had just been issued by the Office of Special Education when the 1997 amendments to IDEA were created. Because those 1997 amendments are what we call landmark amendments. And they're landmark because the things that we hold as kind of commonplace today, like access to the general curriculum, placement neutral funding, curriculum that has the opportunities for students to actually come out with skills that would allow them to command their futures. Those things seem so commonplace to us now, but they weren't really commonplace in 1997. And so this new partnership was 50 national organizations that came together around the things that they cared about in common. And I was asked to be the director of that partnership. So what I'm going to share with you today is 16 years of that kind of work with our general ed, our CTE, VR partners, and community partners that represent various underserved groups in our work. So I've learned a lot over 16 years of trying to do this work. And as this partnership kind of winds down and rolls into a new federal project called the National Center for Systemic Improvement, we really tried to capture what we've learned, big things and small things, over 16 years of trying to cross the boundaries of role, discipline, agency, scale, and the various things that keep us from actually doing work with each other and seeing eye to eye on the same kinds of issues. So we call it leading by convening. And it's really, as the title says, it's the idea that we have different levels of interacting with each other. Sometimes we call each other stakeholders, sometimes we call each other partners, but the highest level of this work is when we actually become allies. And an ally is somebody that you can turn to. You know they're going to be there to give you their honest opinion on this. You may not always be 100% in agreement, but you're always going in the same direction. And the complex environment that we have today in education, and especially as we start to cross environments and think about how the youth that we serve going into the community and into employment, we have a lot of people that we need to move from just being stakeholders to being allies. And so some of what I want to share with you today is the work that we've really tried to do and the way that I've tried to facilitate that work. Because as the facilitator of that work, I spent 27 years at the local level. I always thought that there was some big conversation that we didn't get at the local level. But after going to DC and being in these environments, I know there's no conversation that we don't get. And in fact, it's actually the people that are in those conversations that need to know what you know. What you think, what you feel, what you believe, and what your colleagues know and believe. Because we can enact policies. We can enact policies with the best of intention. But if we don't understand what motivates people at the practice level, those policies don't stick. And so my entire approach to facilitating this work in DC was to bring to prominence what local practitioners know, and to help state agencies recognize that relationship with their practitioners at the local level is probably the most beneficial and the most powerful strategy. Even though it seems like kind of soft and squishy thing, it's actually probably more powerful than some of the things that seem like more rigorous strategies. And so this idea of leading by convening, the idea that we have relationships that actually are strategy, that engagement is strategy. And this is what the work has been that I'm going to share with you today. I'm going to try to shape it around two things. First of all, this idea, the opportunities that present themselves in the new reauthorization of the law, which just happened in December, and the connections between those of us that are working in across fields like special education and career tech education, or dropout prevention career tech education. And the idea that we share some things that, that we can come together on, and together we can really have a bigger voice for helping people understand what the value is of engaging people that have spent their careers in this field, that are engaging with kids every day, engaging with families every day, and they know how to make something stick if they're actually involved from the beginning. So Patty, do I have a little clicker here, or you know, I still have pretty much of a teacher voice. I could probably do it from over there. Okay.
You can tell me when to push and I'll...
I don't know.
I'm kind of a wanderer, so how about if I think it's a...
Oh, there. Hey, I found
Okay,
it.
all right, good. So as we think about this shared work, you want me to do it, Patty?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm better off if I do it myself, okay? Thank you.
Okay, it's these two, it's not right there at the bottom. It says
Okay,
page
very
four,
good,
page
okay.
4.
So as we think about shared work, all right, what would you say is the shared work that's in that bullseye? What's in that bullseye? In your mind, what's in that bullseye? What is this common work that unites us across whatever we think our discipline is, whatever we describe ourselves as? What is that common work? Any brave soul want to share that? What they think that is? Yeah, please.
Helping students.
Yeah, helping students, student success, just as the new law says, every student succeeds, right? So this idea of success is this bullseye. So now take a look at this picture as an example of collaboration. Does this picture work for you? What do you think? Is that a good model of thinking about collaboration? I see some head shaking no, some head shaking yes. So let's hear from one of the people that doesn't think it works. What do you see there?
There's just communication between this.
Ah, perfect. This is actually listed as in a couple of prominent websites as a graphic to depict communication and collaboration. But when you think about this, the idea that we all are expressing this common goal of supporting students, every student succeed. But, you know, is that any more than just rhetoric? Does it mean anything more than just a catchphrase if we don't really have this kind of communication? And when I showed that picture in Georgia, I thought this really kind of captures it. one of the administrators in Georgia said, everybody's in their own lane. And you know, as we think about some of this work, even the work that's described as interdisciplinary and interagency, a lot of times people are in their own lanes. And this gentleman went on to say, those people have to come close enough to join hands. And so that's really what I want to talk about today. What is it? How will we create these opportunities to come close enough to join hands, to know each other well enough to actually get out of our own lane and create these lanes that actually include all of us? So I think that some of the things in ESEA, the Every Student Succeed Act, really kind of points some opportunities for us to join hands. And the first thing is that although there was a big discussion as we went into this reauthorization, we come out of that reauthorization with a commitment to college and career-ready standards. So right there places the work that we do in prominence. There's an ongoing commitment to college and career-ready standards. There's also a commitment to assessment against performance on those standards in grades 3 to 8 and once in high school. So some of the same kind of dialogue we've been having for the last couple of years about testing, whether you're pro-testing or anti-testing, or somewhere in the middle, is going to continue. But it's more important than ever that we get into that conversation because the emphasis on testing is shifting. And this idea of assessment being more of a flashlight on performance rather than a hammer to actually bring it down come down on people that have not met those standards is really coming into much more prominence. So as that changes, knowledgeable people at the practice level have got to get into that conversation. One of the things that, you know, if you've heard me say this, because I know I've said it to this group before, I don't know if you were in the room when I said it, but when I first went to DC, it was so clear to me that you can teach a policymaker about practice, and some of the people that really get into the field are quite knowledgeable. But if you can teach a practitioner about policy, they actually can hold both of those worlds. The idea of what it's supposed to be, and they know what it actually is. They understand the culture of schools. There are few things more powerful than a practitioner that really understands what the policy is intended to do, and then can help policymakers and decision makers and administrators actually work toward the way it's supposed to work. Now that doesn't happen if you don't build a relationship to do that. And that's what this work is all about. So there are two new things that I really want to bring to your attention. And although the regulations aren't out yet, in fact, they actually just the other day published the list of practitioners who will be on that advisory committee to work on the regulations. It was just published the other day. Lots of practitioners from around the country, which is a good thing. Because as this new law rolls out, it's not going to be what we had in NCLB. NCLB was federal role, told everybody what was going to happen, and the states needed to comply. In ESSA, education, the Every Student Succeeds Act, there is a lot more state decisions. And when there are a lot more state decisions, you have the opportunity to influence those decisions. You have the opportunity to help your decision makers understand what that gap is between policy and practice, and what it's going to take for people at the practice level to actually do what is envisioned in these policies. So as this work moves to the state level, it is more important than ever that practitioners actually become informed and participatory in these conversations that are going to take place. We're actually creating our own future here. And if we believe that we have some insights as to what it is that's going to help kids, you know, as professionals, we have the opportunity to do that. The other thing that I want to bring to your attention, and although we don't know exactly what the regulations are going to be yet, we do know that for those students or those sites that have the lowest performance, the lowest, as it's currently listed, the lowest 5% of locations, districts schools in the state, and for the subgroups, which include English language learners, students with disabilities, educationally disadvantaged. These groups are to be targeted with locally designed evidence-based practices. Selecting evidence-based practice at the local level, where you know the context of the work, you understand the factors that influence success and the barriers that actually really influence the lack of performance in some populations. So when you put together this idea that more things are going to happen at the state level, and that for the kids that are the most vulnerable, the local level practice is going to determine much of the strategy. The role of the practitioner is advanced in ways that we have not seen it before. And the practitioners, such as yourselves, who spend a Sunday coming to a conference like this, are the ones that need to arm yourself with the information and the relationship building skills to make what you know heard in the places where they can actually act on it. So that's kind of been my message since I went to DC, and I am really delighted to say that the law has caught up with that. That really the voice of the practitioner and the local level is going to have a new kind of importance as we go forward. So let's get ready for it. So in 2000, I guess it was 2009, when I was here, I had been spending a lot of time talking to groups about the fact that, you know, we can't really start thinking about what's going to make students successful in career tech ed or high school and comprehensive high school in 9th grade or in 8th grade going into 9th grade. It's a long path to getting students to the point where they are at that transition point of 8th to 9th grade. And this idea that success on the way out really depends on success on the way in and all along. So this idea that we work in a pipeline. There is a pipeline that students follow as they move through the education system. Sometimes those that are in the system do not behave as though we're in a pipeline. We work in our own little piece of that pipeline. So this quote, for those of you who were around in the 80s, the first wave of the dropout prevention work, Harold Hodgkinson was a demographer. He really taught us to really think about the demographics of population and what it showed us about how we should craft our strategies to address the differences in various groups. And in 2000, he made this statement, that if people begin to see education as a single entity through which people move, they may begin to behave as if all education was related. And he made that statement because even after years of thinking about this, through this first wave of dropout prevention and first wave of standards in the 80s and 90s, we were still pretty chopped up. That the high school people talk to the high school people, the career tech people talk to the career tech people. We each pointed fingers at each other, you know. And if you're when I was here in Pennsylvania, you know, the career tech centers were always saying, "You're sending us the wrong kids," and the high schools are saying, "Who do you think we have here?" You know. And so that conversation, I think, still goes on in a lot of places, and maybe it does in your setting. And part of that is because neither of those groups are looking back into the system for what is quite predictable when we think about what we know about kids coming through that pipeline. So I want to show you something that, given this current emphasis on every student succeeding, something by the Forum for Youth Investment. Now, the Forum for Youth Investment, they call this the insulated pipeline. And if you live in Pennsylvania, you know about insulating your pipes. You got to wrap them in something so that they continue to work in the cold weather, right? So they capitalized on that with this graphic. Because in the center is that orange core is our education pipeline, starting with early childhood, K-12 system, post-secondary and work and career, right? But you know that those systems operate pretty independently. And even when you take a look at that K-12 system, we could further subdivide that into elementary, middle school, and high school. And we could further subdivide high school into comprehensive high school and career tech. So there's a lot of fragmentation in this pipeline. It's not as though we even see each other all being in this system together. So the Forum for Youth Investment and their project Ready by 21 is an investment by the Superintendent's Association, Colin Powell, America's Promise, and the Gallup Foundation. So, Gallup Foundation, which does a lot of public opinion kinds of surveys. And they're in this work together on what it's going to take for communities to have their kids ready by the time they're 21. And as you can see, they're talking about this insulated pipeline being not stopping with the schools getting their act together, although we're far from getting our act together. What they're saying is we have to wrap that in a series of civic engagements so that it's not just schooling, but it's participation. And then we have to wrap that in community supports so that families have the resources that they need to actually support their children as they move toward adulthood. So they do a lot of work, great work around the country, and you'll find some very practical resources on their website if you want to take a look at that. But for today, we're going to talk about that center, that educational core, the orange part, okay? So, if we talk about meeting the challenge of this work, we have to really talk about two things. We have to talk about the technical side, which is, you're going to see a lot of that as this law rolls out the regulations and the guidance. That is the expert advice, the guidance, the regulations, the protocols, the trainings. That's the technical side of this. And we're pretty good at the technical side. Look at any organization and start looking at the materials. They can pull out tons of resources, beautifully done, right? But look at the other side, the adaptive side, the human side. This is the communication. Who outside the decision makers could actually describe what we're supposed to do? If we can't have regular people, those that are on the front lines and those that are in the communities, understand what this work is supposed to be about in simple terms, it's unlikely it's going to stick. Take a look at the Common Core. I don't know how you feel about the Common Core, positive or negative, but even though they had a lot of stakeholder groups involved in drafting the Common Core, they were high-level stakeholder groups. Those groups did not involve their rank and file membership in meaningful ways. And we certainly didn't reach out to people in communities to explain what the point of this was. I work a lot with the Military Child Education Coalition, and they were in very much support of the Common Core because military families that move 8 to 10 times in the course of a military-connected child's school career could be meeting proficiency in one state, and with the next state they're not meeting proficiency. The next move they're proficient again. Now, if you have a family that's moving 8 or 10 times and they've been in and out of proficiency 5 or 6 times, what does it tell you? It tells you that we don't have a sense of what proficiency is. Now, if it was explained that simply to people about what the Common Core was supposed to be, it would be hard to imagine that people wouldn't at least give it a second look. But we didn't take the time to tell regular people what the Common Core was about. We kept the discussion at this high level. And we can't afford to keep making that same mistake. So our work has been about bringing people together, what we call convening people, to have these discussions with people that are at every level of the system. Decision makers, practitioners, families, and youth in the same conversation at a simple, understandable level. Now, there are certainly people that need to know more about that. They need to know the complexities. But not everybody needs to get into the complexities. Some people just need to have a general idea of what it's supposed to be about and hold that idea and say, do the things I see going on, do they seem to be going in that direction? And if not, what should I be finding out? What should I do? So this is what our work is, to respect the technical side, but bring more of the adaptive side into this work, the human side. So we call this convening. And this idea of convening is about bringing people into shared work, to find this commonality, to understand multiple perspectives, that a family member may not see some pieces of this policy and practice in quite the same way that a businessman or a teacher sees it. And to share those understandings of what I see, and then have somebody else express what they see, and to create enough kinds of interaction that they can start to learn about each other over time. This is what convening is about. Convening is not about holding a meeting. It's about starting a relationship that continues over time, that's focused on practice change, not just talking, but about helping people be able to have a role in making the practice change. So this is, if you're talking about convening, we're talking about bringing people together to find out what they know, what they need to know, what they want to know, what they would be willing to do if you ask them. It's more about saying, from your perspective, what do you see? In your experience, what do you know? Rather than telling people this one-way communication of, here's the new law, I'm going to tell you about it. It's a two-way kind of interaction, so that we're explaining what the key points are, and we're asking, what do you see in this? What do you need to see in this? What would you be willing to do as we start to move toward this? So this blueprint that we've created, Leading by Convening, is really based on the fact it's entirely stakeholder written. If you go online and you click on it, ideapartnership.org, and just go down, the picture, you'll see the picture that's right on the cover of that book they're holding. And it is entirely written by stakeholders, every word of it. I think if you look at the centerfold of the book, I think there's 250 groups and people represented from various states, various organizations, families, youth, that contributed to this. But it is entirely written by stakeholders. So I like to say that if you want to know how the stakeholders want to be involved, this is a message straight from the stakeholders. How to actually move from calling them stakeholders to feeling as though they're your allies. So this is what it looks like. And I'm going to do this briefly because there's some things I'd like us to do. The way we think about this is that the highest level of this is what you can observe people doing. And we call those habits of interaction. 3 habits of interaction are shape this blueprint. Coalescing people around an issue. Now, coalescing people is not the same as telling people about the issue. Coalescing people is bringing up the issue, learning about what people see in it, bringing in the new information, deciding where you're going to go together. So coalescing is a foundational piece of this. Second part is ensuring relevant participation. And I like to say that relevant participation has a couple phases. How many people? It's not just gathering the typical people. You know, I used to have an assistant principal that used to call it the Casablanca approach, round up the usual suspects, you know? So, you know, do we do that in our practice? Do we round up the usual suspects, the same people on every committee? Or are we actually trying to get out there and include more people, including people that may possibly be dissenters? And then the idea of role. You know, do all the people with titles lead, or are there people that don't have titles leading things too? If we're going to, in this day and age, people expect to be engaged. You know, there's not a person who, if they're on the internet, isn't getting 20, 30 things a week of things that they can do and that they can be really actively involved in. You know, we don't do anything like that in terms of education with our stakeholders. So the idea that we have to really kind of move toward helping people find ways that they can contribute is really kind of a key strategy. The idea that actually engaging people, letting them have a little piece of the work, letting them feel like they're connected to this work, to this change, is an important piece of this. And then, of course, we have the last part, the next part here, these adaptive and technical. And then the last part of that is, to what degree are we doing it? Are we doing all those things at a fairly shallow level, or are we really doing it at a deep level? And so we really have tried to outline what it actually means to do this work at these various levels of scale. And so we talk about informing being this sort of one-way work. And a lot of people feel they've done their job if they send out really good messages, a lot of frequent communication, and that's certainly better than not doing it. But is it a one-way out? Or do you move to the next level and try to get it this networking level where you're creating this two-way kind of interaction? Better yet, are you doing it at a collaborating level where you're actually giving people a part of the work to do? You're outlining ways that regular people can participate in the work. And then at the highest level, when you do it so often that you wouldn't think of tackling a new problem in any other way, that's when you've hit that highest or that transforming level. So I encourage you to take a look at the blueprint. There it is. It's outlined very simply. Every piece of it is written plain English. There are 21 embedded tools, some of which we may use today, that actually help you do this work. Not just talk about the work, really do it with people. All the tools that are there are fillable. You can call them up on a screen. You can fill them out at a meeting or a convening that you hold. Save them, print them. So they designed it to be used. So what do we know? We know that we need to work across levels of the education system. We know that we need to work across parts of the system, general ed, special ed, career and tech ed. And we know that we need to reach out to other agencies and other community partners. But let's start with this education pipeline, that center piece that we looked at. So you have a handout, and this is the tool that we created a few years ago. And it looks like this, okay? So what I want you to do is to take a look at this. And individually, just put yes or no. Could you answer these questions about the system that you work in? And if you work in a tech school that's got feeder schools, could you answer it about the feeder schools that feed into your system? Okay? So let's take a minute here. There's 22 questions, but it goes quick. Just answer yes or no, and then let's see what the general consensus is around the room. Okay? Okay, let's see how we did. All right. So let's go to the top. How many people have between 18 and 22 yeses? Anybody? 18 and 22? No? Okay. Let's go to the next one. How many have between 15 and 18? No? All right, let's go to the next one. 11 to 15. 1, 2, how many do we have there?
3.
3? Okay, so then let's see the show of hands, less than 11.
Raise them high. Okay, a bunch.
That is, I've done this with small groups. I've done it with groups like 300 people in the room, and this is almost always the result. So the point here, as you can see, is that we're working at the end of that pipeline, all right? Or the key connector here to post-secondary employment. But a lot of what happens in terms of us and the students that we get happens far back in that pipeline. And so, some of these discussions that we have about, who are the kids that should be coming to the Career Tech Center, and the retort back from the high school, this is who we have, is because we have a sense of what this should be. And we're not really checking in as to how well the pipeline is creating this student that we think we should get and that we need for the high value, high tech, high wage kinds of jobs that we're talking about in career tech education. So when we start thinking about the opportunities in this new law, and that many of the decisions are going to come down to state decisions rather than federal guidance coming down to the states, one way that we can begin to think about this is to, and one way we can begin to actualize our influence is to begin talking about this pipeline and learning about what's happening in the pipelines that serve our career tech centers. So as we look at certain pieces of this data, let's take a look at this, the data that we're asking you to think, that I'm asking you to think about. So, obviously there's a couple here that really talk about who's talking together, right? Who's working together, who's at least sharing, planning together, and maybe even not at that level, just talking together as to what this looks like across time. I did this with a school district right outside of Detroit, and they really got kind of taken by this. And they actually they took PVC pipe, and with their teachers, they built a pipeline. What happens? Everybody starts out in the early childhood system. They put like pipe elbows coming in from the various kinds of early childhood providers. Then they had the elementary system, and every time somebody came off of that, Title I, did they ever come back in? What was lost when they if they went to Title I, Title III, those services, did those services ever come back into coordinating with the general ed group? If they went out to special ed, did that actually come back into general education? They did this with their pipeline, and then they ran water through it. And they saw what happened, that there were just basically hemorrhages for things that came out of their basic system with no way back in. At no point did they connect it back in. So when they did that, that was like they did that was like, kind of building with Tinker Toys or something, I mean, they were really into it. And they actually created this model, and they hung it up on the ceiling like a mobile in the superintendent's office to remind them every day that, every time we decide to do something without understanding what's happening in that pipeline, we're making some decisions that we don't actually understand the implications for down the line. And as people that are at the end of the line, the people that are receiving students that have been the recipient of various well-intentioned interventions that aren't well-informed or well-connected about what else is happening in the world of that child and in that school, we really have created, in many cases, this fragmentation of our own services, and the kids that move through that pipeline may not have the commonality of experience that we sort of presume that they do. So this activity is sort of a wake-up, and it's an activity designed more to get you aware of the things that are happening before students get to you, and the opportunities that you may have to actually make these connections in your own school district, and to bring this kind of thing up in terms of general ways of approaching things in Pennsylvania as they go into thinking about this new law. So that's one particular kind of activity. I wanted to just draw your attention to a few more things on here. There's a couple things in here that are really critical that we often don't take a look at as we think about what's happening in the lives of the students that are coming to us. And the first one is attendance. So I have attendance on here in a number of ways. I also have discipline, suspensions, rates of suspension. If you look back now and you find out what the attendance rates are in some of the elementary schools and the middle schools that are the feeder schools to your system, you can kind of predict what kinds of strategies you should be thinking about putting in place. I mean, we don't have to have the kids in front of us and sending out the the unexcused absences and putting the discipline consequences in place. We can look back into the data that those schools have now, and we know what kind of things we should be building in now. Same thing with discipline. If we're looking back into those systems and we understand what the discipline data looks like in the middle schools and the high schools that we're serving, especially the middle schools and sometimes even the elementary schools, we know what kind of things we should be ready for. It shouldn't be a surprise to us that we're going to see certain things in the situations that we're working in when we become aware of what's happening along that pipeline. So the point of this exercise is to just bring that into awareness and to let you have a simple activity that you could do in your schools, that you could present to your administrators, that actually might start this conversation in the pipeline that you work in. So I don't know, for those of you that were working on this, as you read through it, did the items that are listed there, did they resonate with you as maybe having this kind of impact on understanding, what some of the challenges are going to be when students hit your classrooms? Any comments on the kinds of things that were on there? Was there anything that really stuck out to you as something that might be really important, maybe you hadn't thought of, or something that you know and it felt kind of reassuring that it was on there, that you know that that's an important thing? Anybody have any insights on that? Any reactions? Yeah, please.
I think with the 9th grade year, when we don't have any supports for those kids, and we know the indicators of the results of the 9th grade year.
Absolutely. The 9th grade year, Education Commission of the States, which is sort of a neutral education policy body, they recently did a report on the critical nature of the 9th grade year. And I mean, you know in your own experience, by the second half of the 9th grade year, a student can be so credit deficient that they are not getting out of there in 4 years. And we know what happens when a student is overage for grade. The more disappointing and the farther off that is, the more likely they're going to drop out. So there are some data points here that we can connect to our own experiences. And that is the reason that I put these all into one place. So I did that for this meeting, I think it was 2009, right? I can't tell you the number of places that have used this since that time. And it really fits with what we know about early warning systems. The idea of grades, attendance, discipline, really adding up to things that kids can't overcome after a certain point. And the idea that recognizing that early is an important piece of the work. A lot of our early warning systems are focused on that 9th grade year, and rightly so. 9th grade year is, all the years are critical, but 9th grade is the most critical because many kids can't see their way past 9th grade. They're in too much of a hole. If they don't have the supports in the school and in the family, it's unlikely they're going to continue when they get so far behind in the 9th grade. And so that's what a tool like this is designed, the conversation is designed to start. And I hope that you take this and you find some use for it in your work. Because it started here and it's made its way a lot of places. It would be great to see it actually used back in Pennsylvania to start some conversations in the programs that you work in. Any others that have any comments on anything that was on there that kind of hit you in a way that you reacted to positively or negatively? Anything else? No? Okay. So think about some of these things. And if you do find use for it, I'd certainly like to know the ways in which people reacted to a conversation like this, or the willingness of people to engage beyond just filling something like this out. I hope it's useful to you.
Joanne, before
Yes.
you go on, you know what I was thinking about was the communication between the general ed, special ed, career tech, and that we're still having a lot of the same conversations about students getting into career tech and really not always having what they need. And this is really important because the dropout rate is one of the top investigators. That's what they're looking at, trying
Absolutely.
to lower our dropout rate so that those children can continue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
progress.
the opportunities for conversations across all these groups. I mean, I don't know. I mean, in your school districts, do the general ed, special ed, career tech faculty, do they have opportunities to meet together? Is there anybody here that has that as a regular kind of option? Yeah, you do?
Talking about special education kids.
special education.
Special
and-
education, you come to the table to talk and discuss prior to them going to the CTE, but the regular education kids that might have some deficits, you don't have that conversation,
Yeah.
you just show up at your doorstep.
And how many of the kids that are in general ed that actually have those deficits have some of the very same needs? So actually, a shared conversation really would uncover some common strategies that really benefit all kids that have deficits entering a career tech program. But I think you're right about that. We probably have through school counselors, the conversations between general ed and career tech, probably, more often through counselors than teacher to teacher. But, a lot of times you see that sharing. On the same thing in special ed, you see that through transition coordinators, some high school faculty that are particularly involved in the career tech aspects may have that conversation. But those conversations don't actually happen too often among all three of those groups. Yet, they really, those groups have a lot of shared common needs that could be addressed in common ways. So these are some of the things that it's hard for people that are at the practice level to see that they, because they don't have the power to change that, it's sometimes hard to see that you can influence that. But starting these conversations could possibly help the people that are in the position to set those kind of things up understand the value in creating those kind of things on an ongoing way. So I'm hoping that, by doing an activity like this, you might be able to take this, it's been done for you, you might be able to pass it on, you might be able to get some of these kind of conversations going. And if you do, I'd really love knowing about where some of that went. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, after you start a conversation like that, what happens to keep that kind of conversation going? So you can do something like this, right? But this is a one-time thing. What do you do after that? Well, I wanted to share with you a strategy that we're using, and you have this handout at your table. You should have this handout at your table. You should have gotten that on your way in. If you didn't, just raise your hand and we'll make sure you get it. But one of the things that we've been trying to do is to really think about simple ways to start this dialogue. Because once you bring this kind of thing to people's attention, what do you do to follow it up? I mean, it's not as though any of you really have the time to structure that kind of opportunity. So we've been trying to create tools that allow you to just kind of take it and use it for these kinds of purposes in your schools, ready-to-use kind of things. And the key here is that it conveys complex information in a simple way. And so what we've been really trying to do is create this dialogue. And by dialogue, we actually really mean the, creating the tools that will allow you to have this kind of a conversation. Once you uncover an issue, how are you going to follow up on that? So we created this dialogue guide, again, entirely written by the stakeholders, special ed, general ed, career tech, vocational assessment, all in the same room, all participating in the same conversation. So you can download that on the website as well. But what we try to do is do two kinds of things with the dialogue guide. Create reaction questions where people just kind of, are able to say how a particular issue hits them. Share their perspective on this, okay? So a reaction question is just to really get your perspective out and understand how people feel. So some reaction questions might be, why is whatever the topic is important to you? Why is attendance important to, attendance across the grades important to CTE enrollment? Okay, that might be an example of a reaction question. So you're just getting your opinion out as to how something fits, okay? The other kind of question that we talk about is application questions. And this is after you start getting people into this conversation, you're asking them, what would that mean for your school district? What do you know about what's happening in your school district? What might, how might some of this kind of work influence certain practices in your school district? What might be the interest in inviting people in for this kind of conversation in your school district? So you're moving from this broad level down to what would this mean for you? How could you have a piece of this work, right? So sample questions, sample application questions might be, you know, if I share this information, how might this group be expected to respond to this information? So you're projecting, right? If I'm sharing information on discipline data, how might the high school teachers be expected to respond to this information? What might be the way to actually share this in a way that gets the desired engagement rather than resistance, right? This is what an application question is. So you go from taking a really simple thing, having questions that just let people get their impressions out, and then you move to, what do you know about this? What do you think you could do on this? What's some piece of the work you might be willing to do on this? And the one thing that I have to say is that that encourages me that people are willing, people might be willing to do this, is that last April the Gallup Foundation did a survey of individuals in the workplace. Of all the individuals surveyed, teachers were the ones that said that their opinion was not valued and not sought. So if there is a way to actually re-energize teachers, to understand what they could contribute, maybe a simple strategy like dialogue after a sort of an awareness activity like we just engaged in would bring out some people that you haven't thought of that might be willing to get involved on an issue. I mean, when you think about the number of stakeholders that we really need to engage to create success for the students that we serve, that's a lot of people along the way that can either be your ally or can be a barrier to these students achieving this. So finding even a few people that share some of these issues and might be willing to do something is kind of worth the effort as far as the way I see it. So that's really what these strategies are designed to do. So you have this, this picture, what's called an infographic. And when we first started doing dialogues, we did text-based. So we took a document that would take like less than 20 minutes to read. And we had people create the questions around that document. But even that now, people want things quick. So we have really tried to use these infographics as a way to engage people. Because you take a look at this document, all right, this picture right here, and tell me, could you talk about early childhood issues from this picture? Do you see it? Could you write questions that would help somebody have an early childhood conversation? Could you write questions that help you have a high school conversation or a CTE conversation? Can you see how you would use a picture like this to write questions around those kinds of issues? Because when you take a look at this, it's depicting this pipeline, but it's depicting it in a way that we understand. In other words, leaky pipes. But all those leaks are kids. And so this conversation around why is this pipe leaking? The same reason that school district outside Detroit created that PVC model of their pipeline is that we have cracks and we have disconnects across the system. And each one of those disconnects has got questions that people at the practice level know about. They are not often asked for what they know about it. And there's definitely not asked for what they're willing to do about it. But in this day and age, the idea of engaging people has a new kind of prominence and a new kind of draw. And so what we're hoping to do is to create opportunities for where people want to get together and write these questions. And what I was hoping that we might be able to do today, but I know we're out of time, right, Patty? Would be to practice writing some of these kinds of questions. The idea that you know, there's no right or wrong answer. You can do this with a group of teachers, you can do it with a group of families, you can do it with a group of youth, and have them write the questions, the application, and the reaction questions. Because if they write the questions, they own it. It's theirs. They are more invested in actually helping you hold those conversations. And the way that we're hoping that people will envision this is, if you don't know what people think, if you don't find a way for them to share what they know, it's unlikely that, no matter what these changes are that we put in place, that they're going to stick. We have to get to the personal belief systems of the people that are at that practice level. It's that adaptive leadership. We've had plenty of work on the technical side, and we're going to continue that, because we need to know about evidence bases. We need to know the protocols for actually doing something with fidelity. But we also need to know, what is it that's going to make it more likely that someone is going to do this when nobody's looking? And it is the personal belief and the personal practice change that actually helps people to say and believe that I'm doing this, I've had conversations about this, I've been heard on this, and I'm going to make this part of my own practice. And as we move into this, the implementation of this new law, with more decisions coming down to the state and more decisions about the most vulnerable populations coming down to the local level, the idea of actually helping those practitioners move from being stakeholders to move into being partners and then being allies in this work is a critical piece of actually helping us achieve those results. That idea of what's in the center requires that we start doing things often enough that we come together close enough to be able to hold hands. And if we don't find simple things to do to engage the people that are in this work with us, it's unlikely we're going to come close enough to hold hands and be together, focused on that bullseye in a way that allows us to work in a coordinated way toward our shared goals. So I encourage you to take a look at the work that the stakeholders have done through the IDA partnership. And as you do, I hope you look at the roles of the people that have been involved there, because you'll see that every bit of this work was done to raise the profile of practitioner voice. And now it's time to actually show that when practitioners have a voice, they will exert it. And they will exert it in a positive and an engaging fashion. So anything that we can do to support you here in Pennsylvania, I'll be happy to do. And thanks for inviting me back.